I think in Florida now, anyone can hunt a python, and you get a prize too. Like you get money.
The Florida Everglades is a place of contradictions, a slow-moving river that looks like land, a paradise that hides a predator's empire. From above, it's endless green and gold, stretching beyond the horizon. But beneath the shimmering surface, the balance of life has been quietly rewritten. For decades, the Everglades has been under siege, not by industry, not by pollution, but by something far more cunning. A killer that slithers through the sawgrass unseen, the Burmese python. It doesn't belong here. Its real home lies thousands of miles away in Southeast Asia, where it hunts in jungles and marshes under the same thick heat. But somehow, Florida became its second kingdom. The invasion didn't happen overnight. It began in living rooms. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, the exotic pet trade was booming. People wanted something rare, something powerful, and baby pythons were perfect. Small, patterned like jewelry, calm enough to hold in one hand. But that calm was temporary. Those pets grew, and grew fast. Within just a few years, they were 15 to 20 feet long and strong enough to crush a deer. Some owners panicked. Some released them. Others lost them when Hurricane Andrew ripped through South Florida in 1992, destroying reptile breeding centers and releasing hundreds, maybe thousands, of snakes into the wild. That storm didn't just flatten buildings. It sowed the seeds of an ecological disaster. Once free, the pythons found everything they could ever want: warmth, water, shelter, and prey that had no idea what a snake like this even was. To native animals, raccoons, rabbits, even deer, the python was invisible death. It struck fast, coiled tight, and vanished into the grass again before sunrise. With no natural predators and the ability to lay up to 100 eggs at a time, the population exploded. Biologists estimate that there are now tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Burmese pythons living in South Florida. And what they've done to the ecosystem is devastating. In areas overrun by pythons, mammals have almost vanished. Raccoons, gone. Possums, gone. Rabbits, nearly extinct. Even deer and bobcats are disappearing. In one infamous case, scientists found a fully grown deer inside a python's stomach. In another, a python and an alligator were found locked in a fatal embrace, both dead, each refusing to let go. Every missing animal creates a ripple effect. With fewer small mammals, scavengers like hawks and owls have less to hunt. With fewer scavengers, carcasses rot longer, changing the very nutrients in the soil. It's like pulling one thread from a web and watching the whole thing collapse. The Everglades, once teeming with life, has become eerily quiet. What was once a wetland symphony is now a whisper. The pythons have built an empire, one body at a time. Florida scientists, hunters, and locals tried to fight back, but every time they thought they were making progress, the snakes adapted faster. It became clear that this wasn't just an infestation, it was a war. And as the Everglades sank deeper into silence, one chilling question started to spread among the people who lived near the swamps. If humans created this problem, could they ever truly fix it? But the state wasn't ready to surrender, and what Florida did next would turn the fight into something the world had never seen before. When officials realized how unstoppable the python invasion had become, they made a decision that sounded more like a TV stunt than government policy. If trained biologists couldn't stop the snakes, maybe ordinary people could. So they turned the crisis into a contest. In 2013, Florida launched what it called the Python Challenge, an open invitation to anyone brave enough to step into the swamps and take on one of the world's most efficient predators. The rules were simple: catch as many pythons as you can and get paid for every one. It was part wildlife mission, part carnival, and part desperation. Over 1,600 people signed up. Some were professional hunters, some were thrill seekers, some had never set foot in the swamp before. They came armed with airboats, flashlights, machetes, and GoPros, ready to hunt monsters under the Florida sun. The media went wild. Cameras followed contestants wading chest deep through muddy water, scanning the reeds for a flicker of movement. News anchors called it Florida's most dangerous game. It looked like an action movie, but the results told a darker story. After weeks of sweat, mud, and near misses with gators, the grand total was 68 snakes. 68 out of tens of thousands. For scientists, it was barely a blip on the population chart. For everyone else, it was a sobering reminder. These snakes were winning. Still, Florida wasn't ready to quit. They ran more challenges, added better training, bigger cash prices, and night vision scopes. Hunters came back year after year, armed with new gear and new determination. Some caught dozens of snakes. One even bagged a monster more than 17 feet long. But every expert who looked at the data saw the same trend. The python population wasn't shrinking. It was thriving. For every one caught, dozens more hatched unseen. It was a numbers game that humans simply couldn't win. And yet, the contest continued, partly out of pride, partly out of hope, and partly because the public loved the sport. But behind the scenes, biologists began asking a harder question. If human hunters couldn't outfight the snake, maybe the strategy itself was wrong. Maybe this wasn't a problem of strength. Maybe it was a problem of intelligence. And that realization changed everything. Because the next phase of Florida's war wouldn't look like a competition, it would look like a mission. What came next turned the Everglades from a reality show into a battlefield, one where hunters traded fame for paychecks, and the stakes got real. When the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds went home, Florida officials faced a grim truth. The snakes were still out there, multiplying, spreading, and swallowing the Everglades alive. The swamp wasn't just losing its balance, it was losing its silence. Deer, rabbits, raccoons, entire species were disappearing. Biologists found marshes that used to echo with bird calls, now eerily quiet. The food chain was collapsing from the bottom up. Something had to change. So the state decided to turn hunters into soldiers. In 2017, the South Florida Water Management District launched the Python Elimination Program, a name that sounded more like a military operation than a conservation plan. This time, it wasn't a contest, it was a contract. The rules were simple. You got paid by the hour, plus a bounty for every snake. At first, it was just a handful of hired professionals, people who knew the swamps like the backs of their hands. But as the headlines grew, so did the team. Soon, there were dozens of full-time hunters, armed with GPS trackers, thermal cameras, and night vision scope. They patrolled the wetlands at night, cutting engines to drift silently through the moonlit grass. Every rustle could mean a python. Every splash could be a gator, or something worse. One hunter, Bill Booth, described it best. It's like playing hide and seek with an animal that doesn't want to be found, and if you lose, you disappear. But the danger wasn't just physical. Scientists warned that hunting alone could never keep up. For every python a team caught, several more had already laid eggs somewhere deep in the swamp. Each female could produce up to 100 hatchlings a year. It was like trying to empty an ocean with a bucket. So researchers began asking, what if they didn't need to catch every python? Just the right ones. The idea was simple but radical. Find the breeders, find the nest, and stop the cycle at its source. That required something hunters couldn't do on their own: intelligence gathering. Florida began quietly experimenting with tracking technology, radio transmitters, thermal drones, even implanted chips, but none worked well enough in the brutal, waterlogged maze of the Everglades, until one biologist proposed something that sounded insane, at least at first. If we can't find the snakes, maybe we can make the snakes come to us. That single sentence would set off a chain of events leading to one of the strangest, most controversial experiments in modern wildlife science. Because what Florida unleashed next wasn't an animal, or a hunter, or even human. It was a machine, and it looked exactly like a rabbit. It started in a lab, not a swamp. A small team of engineers and biologists at the University of Florida had one goal: to outsmart the python. They tried tracking chips, drones, even trained dogs, but the snakes always adapted. They could sense vibrations, detect heat, and vanish before hunters even knew they were close. So one researcher asked a question that stopped the room cold. What if we stop chasing them and start baiting them? That single idea became the foundation for one of the strangest projects Florida had ever funded. Part biology, part robotics, and part psychological warfare. They called it Project Decoy. The concept was simple enough: create lifelike animal replicas that could survive in the wild, attract snakes, and transmit data back to the scientists. But building one was anything but simple. Each rabbit was equipped with solar panels, motion sensors, and a miniature heat core that mimicked the body temperature of real prey. Underneath the soft synthetic fur was a tiny AI processor that learned from its environment, adjusting its movements, twitching at random intervals, and even imitating breathing patterns. To a python's thermal vision, it looked alive. To human eyes, it looked too alive. When the team released the first prototype, they placed cameras nearby, not expecting much. The robots twitched in the grass, motionless but alert, soaking up the Florida sun. Hours passed, nothing happened. Then, just before dusk, something moved. A massive python, over 12 feet long, slithered silently through the sawgrass, its body blending perfectly into the mud. It stopped, waited, then struck. The impact triggered every sensor in the decoy. The moment the snake bit down, GPS coordinates were sent directly to a remote receiver. For the first time, scientists could track a python's movements in real time, not by chasing it, but by tricking it. The test was a success, and once the footage leaked, the internet lost its mind. Some people called it genius, others called it creepy. Conspiracy forums claimed Florida was creating AI animals to spy on wildlife, but for the biologist, it wasn't about fame, it was about survival. If they could lure the snakes in, map their habits, and find their nest, maybe, just maybe, the Everglades could fight back. But not everyone believed it would stay just a science project, because as the data came in, something strange started happening. The snakes' behavior began to change. They were learning too. And that's when Project Decoy stopped being just a tool and started becoming a race.
Even after Project Decoy was officially paused, the cameras continued to record. Footage that had never been released showed scenes no one could have imagined. Rivers of sawgrass hiding massive, coiling shapes, shadows sliding silently along mudbanks, pythons interacting with the decoys in ways that engineers never predicted. Some snakes simply ignored the robotic rabbits. Others circled them again and again, pausing, flicking their tongues, testing the heat, the scent, even the twitching ears. One clip, captured at dawn, stunned the research team. A python approached the decoy, paused, then seemed to push it toward another snake. It was almost like it was hurting, a level of interaction no one had expected. Another recording showed a python striking the decoy with such force that the motion sensors triggered dozens of alerts in sequence, indicating that more than one snake was nearby. Scientists watched the playback in disbelief. They were seeing patterns, coordination, caution, strategy. The Everglades invaders weren't just surviving anymore, they were learning. Even the most optimistic biologists began to whisper questions they hadn't dared ask before. Could these snakes, with their incredible instincts and now subtle adaptations, ever be fully controlled by humans? The decoys had done more than attract snakes. They had revealed the hidden network of the Everglades, the hunting grounds, the breeding nests, the trails the snakes traveled each night. For the first time, humans had a map of the invasion, but it was a map fraught with warning. Every discovery reminded them how small their advantage really was. Even with the technology, the sheer size and complexity of the Everglades meant there was no way to track every python, no way to stop the next generation from spreading farther, faster, and smarter than before. The footage also revealed another unsettling truth. Some pythons began avoiding certain areas altogether, places where decoys had been deployed, creating safe zones in the swamp. It was a silent, almost invisible shift in the ecosystem. Humans were not just failing to stop the snakes, they were teaching them. The researchers realized the robotic rabbits were more than a tool. They were a mirror, showing the intelligence of a predator humans had underestimated for decades. And yet, hope remained. The decoys had worked well enough to locate breeding females, track movement, and predict python activity. They had given scientists a foothold, a way to fight back where brute force had failed. But every victory in the Everglades came with a cost: money, ethics, and a growing unease about how far humans could push nature before it pushes back. The question lingered over the swamp. If technology could outsmart the snakes, could it also preserve the fragile ecosystem without creating new unintended consequences? For the first time in decades, humans had a fighting chance. But in the Everglades, even a chance could be fleeting. And somewhere in the shadows of the sawgrass, the pythons were already waiting.
The first batch of robotic rabbits rolled into the Everglades quietly, almost like a small army of furry spies. At sunrise, the prototypes looked almost comical. Small, soft bodies with twitching ears, wires peeking from under synthetic fur, and tiny solar panels glinting in the mist. But there was nothing playful about their purpose. Each decoy was designed with precision. Weatherproof polymers kept them safe from rain and mud. Thermal pads replicated the heat of a real rabbit. Chemical emitters released the faint, musky scent of marsh mammal. Even the ears twitched, powered by nearly silent micromotors. Hidden cameras and motion sensors turned each rabbit into a miniature research station. Whenever a snake came close, the decoy recorded everything, from the angle of attack to the flick of a tongue, sending real-time data to scientists miles away. The first night was tense. Researchers waited in boats, flashlights cutting through the mist, eyes on the dark silhouettes of the swamp. Shadows shifted in the sawgrass. Then, movement. A python glided silently toward one of the decoys. Its body shimmered under the moonlight. Tongue flicking, it approached the rabbit cautiously. And then, strike. The decoy sensors triggered immediately. A silent alarm pinged back at the field station. The python coiled around the rabbit's body, trying to test its prey, while cameras captured every detail. It was work. Within weeks, patterns emerged. Pythons were consistently drawn to the decoys, revealing hidden nests, mating grounds, and hunting trails that humans had never mapped. For the first time in decades, scientists could see the Everglades from the predator's perspective. The success wasn't just in luring the snakes, it was in gathering intelligence. Each strike, each hesitation, each retreat, it added another dot on a growing map of python activity. The Everglades, once a maze of unseen danger, was becoming readable, but challenges remained. The cost of each decoy was high, around $4,000 per unit, and the swamp's extreme heat, humidity, and predators constantly tested their durability. Raccoons, alligators, and even other snakes sometimes damaged the devices, forcing the team to repair or replace units frequently. Yet despite these obstacles, the psychological effect was undeniable. For the first time in years, the researchers felt they were on the offensive. The Everglades, silent for decades under the weight of the python invasion, now held a pulse of possibility, a hum of motors hidden beneath soft fur. And while the robots did not capture every snake, they changed the rules of the game. Humans were no longer simply chasing. They were observing, learning, and predicting. It was a new kind of battle, a battle that merged biology, robotics, and sheer human ingenuity. The Everglades had been quiet for far too long. Now, with every twitch, every hiss, and every shadow in the reeds, the fight was just beginning. The Everglades had always been a battlefield between nature and humanity. And now, technology had joined the fight. The robotic rabbits had proven one thing: humans could innovate, adapt, and even outsmart a predator for a time. But they also revealed a hard truth. The Burmese pythons weren't just surviving, they were learning, watching, and responding. Every new tactic humans employed was a lesson for the snakes, a challenge they adapted to with uncanny precision. Scientists began to see the Everglades in a new light. Every marsh, every canal, every hidden bend in the reeds told a story. Each movement of a python could now be traced, measured, and mapped. They could pinpoint breeding grounds, track nests, and anticipate hunting patterns. And yet, the scale of the swamp made it impossible to cover everything. 100 decoys could track a few dozen snakes. Thousands might be needed to monitor the entire 1.5 million acres. Each new device cost thousands of dollars, and each storm, predator, or heat wave risked destroying the fragile units. Still, hope had returned to the scientists' eyes. For decades, the Everglades had been silent. Now, beneath the soft hum of micromotors and the twitch of synthetic ears, a pulse returned. A chance, however slim, to fight back. The lessons from the experiment went beyond the swamp. Conservationists began asking, could this blend of robotics and biology help other ecosystems under siege? Could mechanical decoys guide predators, track invasive species, or even restore balance where human intervention alone had failed? But caution remained. The experiment had raised questions about ethics, control, and unintended consequences. Could pushing predators to adapt too quickly create new problems? Could the very tools meant to protect the ecosystem alter the behavior of wildlife in ways no one could predict? For now, the Everglades remained both a laboratory and a battlefield. Every python strike, every twitch of a robotic rabbit, every data point collected carried both knowledge and warning.
Florida had learned something crucial. Brute force alone would never defeat a predator this clever. Survival demanded ingenuity, persistence, and a willingness to embrace technology, even when it looked like science fiction. And while the swamp slept under the morning sun, one thing was certain. The battle was far from over. The Everglades had been challenged, and now it was fighting back. One python, one rabbit, and one innovation at a time. For humans, it was a reminder that nature may bend, but it rarely breaks. And that sometimes the most unexpected tools, a robotic rabbit powered by sunlight, can turn the tide in the most unforgiving wilderness on Earth. The question lingered like mist over the reeds. Had Florida finally found a way to outsmart the snakes? Or had it just provoked them into becoming something even more unstoppable?